And so just following up those changes then, how is that going to marry? I mean, it seems to be a two-way thing, because in the British, I mean, I know about the British education system, there seems to be some pressure away from the habitus training, you know, the character building thing, although we still, so it's become such a thing where it's now a radical thing to say, well, you ought to do a little bit more of character building in schools, which kind of says that we've moved a little bit away from what perhaps originally we thought we were doing. And also then if we go, say, to China, which obviously is now becoming a very important leader in so many things, they're moving more towards the character building and the more creative side of education that we've kind of always had. Does this mean that, does the shift towards the sort of let's call it English kind of education system, does that pose a difficulty for the Chinese political system as it works at the moment? Because it seems as though one of the things it needs is, it doesn't need too many creative people. It needs almost Confucians in order to work.
Well, there's two separate questions. The first one is the crossover, which is a feature, as we've discussed before, of many things that are happening in the world now, that we are becoming Chinese and they are becoming Anglosphere. There is, I mean, there was quite an interesting program, I don't know if you saw it, the BBC did, where they took some Chinese teachers and they put them in a British school and they compared the results of Chinese teaching and English teaching. And I think the thing was, it was a cheat, and I think it was fudge, but they made it out that the Chinese teaching produced better results than the English teaching. And a few educationists, people like Gove and so on, who to my mind know very little about education, and including the present Secretary of Education. I mean, most politicians who end up, and most administrators of education, know very little about what the purpose or nature of education is. And so they tend to think of it more in the Confucian terms, that it's a place where you learn facts and you learn certain basic intellectual skills. And so the result of the fact that all the top results in mathematics came from Chinese schools in Shanghai and so on rattled the British educational establishment quite a bit a few years ago, and you know, Finland and others. We weren't high on the league tables, this whole league table nonsense, of course, immediately, because if you measure the attainment of schools and how good they are and so on in terms of examinations, then all the other things go out of the window. So if you had an examination system which also gave points for music and drama and friendship and love and all the rest of it, then it would look different. So the English educational establishment, or the people who ran it, were rattled a few years ago and said, you know, let's be more Chinese and work harder and less of this frivolous stuff of games and all that, set off the playing fields and we'll get some money anyway, etc.
It's interesting that Eton never did that. They've got more playing fields than anybody.
I mean, Eton is a very example I often give, because Eton, I mean, the old Etonians, for other reasons as well, but they tend to do pretty well. I mean, when they come to Cambridge, everyone at King's College was from Eton at one point, but you know, the Etonians do pretty well in examinations. But at Eton, they have this regime where they're taught in the morning, and then it's up to you the rest of the day. I mean, basically, you can do some work, but you do it on your own, and you do it in libraries, and you have a lot of clubs and a lot of peripheral activities. And my school was like that. So basically, education, the schooling part of it is minimalized, and I think the Dragon School probably still does that. You know, keep it to within bounds, and then, because even that, I mean, anyone who knows anything about the brain will know that we can't work at tough intellectual work for more than 6 or 8 hours a day maximum, which is why the Chinese educational system is defective at the moment, because children are expected to work for 12 or 14 hours a day, and half of that is just wasted because they're so exhausted. But basically, we've veered that way, but hopefully it's moving back in the other direction, because people are more and more aware that with artificial intelligence, with the new world we're moving into, it's not what you know, it's your whole approach to discovering things and creativity and so on that is going to make the difference in the future. And also that people are going to be increasingly versatile in their lives, that they're going to have to move from job to job and do different things. And therefore the wider skills of working with people and friendship and being able to work on your own and so on, those are going to be more and more important. And so I suspect we'll move back again. On the other question, there is a tension, an obvious tension in a place like China with education, because as I explained, in most civilizations, education is the way you keep people in check, in control. It's a form of discipline. You shape their minds so that they don't ask awkward questions and they don't rethink things. And that's the same in Buddhism and Islam and so on. You should learn the old truths and not question them. And that is how China was governed for 2,000 years. If you introduce an educational system whose aim, as we think of it, is to make you rethink things, come up with new solutions, question everything, be confrontational with your teachers, with facts. If you read a book, you don't accept it. You say, what's wrong with it? I remember when my early Chinese PhD students and Japanese ones used to come with their first chapters of their PhD, and I'd say, you've just copied out paragraphs of books. And they said, yes, that's what we're taught to do in China. I said, you can't do that here. You look at the book and you quote a bit, and then you say, this is wrong, this is right, this is why I like it, and so on. What we do here is we have students, and when they come for their supervisions, they don't repeat to us what they've discovered. They summarize what they've discovered, and then they say, this is what's good about it, this is what's bad about it. So you're constantly questioning. And that's how our whole system, whether it's the legal system, our religious system, you're seeking for truth. You don't have the truth, and no external body, whether it's a book or the government or anything, has the truth. Now, if you have an educational system which has too much of that, then if you are trying to run a civilization with 1.3 billion people who have access to the internet and are being taught in really good schools, which say, you must learn to think and question, there is a moment at which it goes to a point where someone says, well, the emperor has no clothes, etc. And so there is a tension, and from time to time, when I visit China, my friends say at the moment, the Chinese are saying we don't want too much Western style education here, and we're keeping out certain books and so on and so on. I mean, I've had an enormously privileged insight into Chinese education. For example, I met the Minister of Education in China twice and had long talks with him. I've met top educationalists, specialists, and heads of universities and so on. They're always extremely open. They're always extremely interested in how British education works, very keen to absorb the best of it. But they also know that they live in a world where, for example, it's well known in Chinese universities, most university lectures, there'll be one or two students there who are informally requested to report back if there's anything too unconventional or questioning. I mean, the Chinese learnt that free thought is dangerous. I mean, the epicenter of the Tiananmen events were universities, both in Beijing and elsewhere. And so they keep an eye on schools, they keep an eye on universities. And so education in China is, in a way, much more political than it would be in this country. I mean, it is increasingly political in this country. I mean, the government recently brought in a stipulation that about free speech, and they would like to get. At one point, they were requesting all universities to report anyone who was looked as if they were a Muslim radical or whatever. So they're delving in, they're putting their fingers in. But traditionally, and this is one of the other extraordinary things about British education, and particularly universities, they've been separated from the political establishment. It's part of our separations. Even symbolically, in all continental educational systems, it's absolutely fused into the political structure. For example, at the university level, the universities in France and elsewhere are part of the civil service. I was surprised to find this the case in Japan too. If you are a French academic, you are a civil servant, as you are in Japan. And the universities are in the centers of government in Paris, and Lyon, and so on. Oxford and Cambridge are in smallish or middle-sized towns away from London. And they have jealously guarded their independence as much as possible.